The roar of thunder tore through the sky like a war cry. The night was heavy, the sky tinged with dark gray, and the air carried a tension that seemed ready to explode. There, at the top of Mount Olympus, Zeus stood on his marble balcony, his gaze fixed on the vastness of the heavens. His hand gripped the golden lightning bolt tightly, an extension of his power. But his eyes, which normally bore the determination of a god, were dark and filled with uncertainty. Olympus, once resplendent and full of life, now seemed like a desolate place. The other gods avoided him, watching from a distance with wary eyes. Something was wrong. Something that not even Zeus could control, for the first time in ages. At the base of Mount Olympus, mortals ran in desperation. A devastating storm, unlike anything ever seen before, was forming. Winds ravaged crops, lightning danced across the mountains, and the sea swallowed entire villages. To them, it was a punishment from the gods. But what no one knew was that even Zeus was afraid of what was coming. The sound of footsteps echoed through the throne hall. It was his wife, Hera. "Do you know what's happening, Zeus?" she asked, her voice laden with suspicion. Zeus averted his gaze, saying nothing. For the first time, the god of gods had no control over what was happening. Something was growing within the storm, something he did not understand. To understand the storm ravaging Olympus, it is necessary to go back in time, to the beginning of Zeus's story and his absolute power. Zeus was not born king of the gods. He had to conquer the throne through pain and bloodshed. His father, Cronus, the devourer of children, had swallowed all of Zeus's siblings at birth, fearing that one of them would overthrow him. Only Zeus escaped, hidden by his mother, Rhea, who entrusted him to be raised in a cave on the island of Crete. There he was fed with the milk of the goat Amalthea and grew up in secret, vowing that one day he would free his siblings and overthrow Cronus. When the time came, Zeus challenged his father, forcing him to vomit his siblings, Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. United, the siblings declared war against Cronus and the Titans, a battle that would come to be known as the Titanomachy. For 10 years, the sky and earth were torn apart by conflict. Mountains crumbled, oceans were raised as weapons, and the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and the sound of thunder. Desperate for a way to win the war, Zeus made a drastic decision. He freed the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, monstrous creatures imprisoned in Tartarus. In exchange for their freedom, the Cyclopes gifted Zeus the golden lightning bolt, a weapon so powerful that no one could resist it. However, Zeus's greatest mistake occurred at that moment. To access Tartarus and free the Cyclopes, he had to break the seal that imprisoned not only the monsters but also a much older force. Chaos, the primordial entity of the universe. Chaos was what existed before everything, a pure and untamed power that had been sealed away at the dawn of time so that order could exist. Zeus knew that breaking the seal was dangerous, but blinded by the desire for victory, he ignored the warnings. At the end of the war, Cronus was defeated, and Zeus took the throne of Olympus. Peace had been restored, or so he believed. Millennia passed, and Zeus ruled Olympus with unquestionable authority. He distributed power among his siblings. Poseidon took the seas, Hades the underworld, while Zeus assumed control over the sky and the earth. But despite his dominance, the balance among the gods was fragile. Hera, his wife, harbored growing resentment over his betrayals and lack of respect. Poseidon and Hades, in turn, believed that Zeus had accumulated more power than he should and kept them in the background. Athena, Zeus's daughter and the goddess of wisdom, began to question his decisions, fearing that he ruled more out of ego than justice. Olympus was a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Meanwhile, chaos began to manifest itself silently. At first, they were only small signs, inexplicable changes in the winds, seas turning restless without Poseidon's command, and lightning streaking across the sky without Zeus's summoning. Mortals began to notice these anomalies and started fearing that the gods were angry. Sacrifices were made in temples. Whispered pleas for mercy were spoken at the feet of Zeus's statues. Yet even the god of gods was confused. He sensed something different in the air, as if an invisible force was circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was then that Zeus began to have nightmares. In his dreams, he saw the seal he had broken during the Titanomachy. He heard voices whispering in an ancient tongue, crying out for vengeance. It was as if chaos was drawing closer, demanding the price of its freedom. Zeus told no one, not even Hera. The most powerful god in the world was now confronting fear, a feeling he would never admit to having. However, Zeus's silence only deepened the tensions on Olympus. The other gods sensed that something was wrong, but no one dared confront him directly. And now, the storm was the harbinger that the secret Zeus had kept was about to be revealed. The force he had unleashed was closer than ever, and he knew he would have to face the consequences of his actions, alone, or perhaps alongside the very gods he had so often pushed away. The storm had reached its peak. The winds howled like the laments of lost souls, while the sky seemed to shatter into 1,000 pieces with each deafening thunderclap. Lightning streaked across the heavens, but they were not Zeus's lightning. These wild sparks, deep red and fiery, were something else, something even the god of gods could not control. At the heart of Olympus, the gods stood in fear, gathered in the great throne hall. Terror was etched on the faces of deities like Apollo, Artemis, and Hephaestus, a terrible omen of what was to come. Zeus, his gaze locked on the storm forming above Olympus, tried once more to summon his golden lightning bolt. He raised his arm, but to his horror, nothing happened. The lightning, his most powerful weapon, did not respond to his call. It was as if the connection between him and his source of power had been severed. A tremor ran through his body, but he could not afford to show weakness. Hera, standing beside him, watched with eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and restrained fury. "Zeus, what is happening? What are you not telling us?" she asked, her voice heavy with tension. Before Zeus could answer, the world around them bent and shattered, like a mirror smashed by invisible forces. It was not a creature that emerged from the ground, it was reality itself that began to break apart. The marble of Olympus dissolved into a colorless void, and a rift in space opened above the gods, devouring the very light. Chaos had no form. It was not a monster, nor a shadow, but a living void, an absence of existence spreading like a disease. Wherever its presence touched, time itself unraveled. Zeus felt his heart race. It was as if he was on the verge of being erased from history itself. Then, a soundless voice filled the minds of all the gods at once. "The cycle you call order is an illusion. You have stolen existence. Now, it is time to return to what came before." "Zeus," Chaos's voice echoed, reverberating through the walls of Olympus. "You freed me. You stole my power to defeat Cronus. And now, the time has come for you to pay the price." Zeus stood still, trying to hide the turmoil within him. He had known this moment would come, but he had never imagined it would be so devastating. He took a step forward, facing the shadow that now loomed over the hall. "I did what was necessary to save the world," he said firmly, but Chaos laughed. "Save the world? No, Zeus. You acted out of pride. You wanted the throne. You wanted power. And now, you shall see what happens to those who dare defy the primordial order." The world shook, but not like an earthquake. Time itself wavered. For an instant, Zeus saw the throne hall of Olympus vanish, and in its place, he saw the infinite void before the creation of the world. He felt his body weaken, as if he were unraveling. Hera called his name, but the sound reached him like a distant echo, lost among the fragments of existence. He tried to lift his lightning bolt, but realized there was no hand left to hold it. He was disappearing. Chaos did not fight. Chaos erased. In despair, Zeus felt something new, the fear of non-existence. He realized that alone, he could not resist. For the first time, he would need the strength of all the gods, or everything that had ever existed would cease to be. Zeus rose slowly, feeling a strange weight in his body, a weakness he had never experienced before. "You cannot defeat chaos alone," Hera shouted, but Zeus ignored her. The other gods, who had been silent, began to stir uneasily. Poseidon, gripping his trident, stepped forward. "If you created this problem, brother, perhaps it's time to admit that this is no longer a burden you can carry alone." Hades, who had stood at the edge of the room until now, crossed his arms and smirked bitterly. "Maybe it's time for you to prove that you truly deserve to be called the king of the gods, Zeus." Each word struck Zeus like a blade. He knew chaos was not just a physical enemy but also a reflection of his failures, his thirst for power, his pride, and his inability to trust others. As chaos grew, devouring the light of the hall, Zeus realized he was not just facing an external enemy. He was battling something much greater, his own arrogance. Throughout his existence, he had believed that his absolute power made him invincible, that he was a god above all others. But now, it was clear that alone, he could not win. He looked at the other gods, who stood armed and ready to fight, waiting for a single command. And then, for the first time, Zeus swallowed his pride and said the words he never thought he would. "I need you." The throne hall was consumed by chaos, quite literally. The primordial entity, now a massive, shapeless force of shadow and energy, filled every corner of the great hall, as if trying to suffocate the gods themselves. The air grew heavier with every second, and even the torch flames were snuffed out, leaving the room in terrifying dimness. Chaos, shifting endlessly in form, seemed to feed on the rising fear among those present. The gods whispered hesitantly, and Hera turned to Zeus with eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. "You can no longer hide your mistakes from us. This fight is yours, but it is ours as well." Zeus, gripping the golden lightning bolt newly reforged by the Cyclopes, felt the weight of Hera's words. For millennia, he had believed that his strength alone was enough to protect Olympus and the mortals below. He had ruled with authority, sometimes with severity, but always alone. But now, standing before chaos, the literal manifestation of everything uncontrollable and untamable, he realized that his power, no matter how grand, was not absolute. He would need the strength of the other gods to triumph, or everything would be lost. With a determined gesture, Zeus raised the lightning bolt and roared, "Athena, Poseidon, Hades, all of you. Today, we are not just gods divided by our domains. Today, we are Olympus. If we fight together, we can contain chaos and restore order." His voice thundered, and the gods began to react. Athena was the first to step forward, holding her shield and spear, glowing with the light of wisdom. "Then let's end this together, Father," she declared, taking the front line. Poseidon, his trident spinning in a spiral of oceanic energy, stepped beside Athena. Meanwhile, Hades, usually cynical and distant, raised his hands, summoning the dark forces of the underworld to battle the primordial entity. Chaos laughed with a voice that sounded like 1,000 overlapping thunderclaps. "You think that together you can stop me? I have existed before you, before light, before any order." The entity unleashed a devastating attack, a wave of dark energy that shook Mount Olympus to its core. The walls began to disintegrate, and part of the ceiling collapsed. But this time, the gods held their ground. Poseidon raised a spiraling barrier of water to counter the attack, while Hades manipulated shadows to divert the debris. Athena, with her spear radiating divine energy, struck directly at the core of the entity, causing it to waver slightly. For the first time, chaos recoiled. At the center of the battle, Zeus channeled all the power the gods were pouring into him. Every time Athena struck a blow or Poseidon raised barriers, he felt the energy flow into his golden lightning bolt. With each passing moment, he realized that absolute power was not something he should bear alone, but something that grew when shared. He glanced at Hera, who stood behind him, coordinating the lesser gods to protect Olympus. For the first time in ages, Zeus felt a deep respect for her, realizing that his reign had only been possible because she had been by his side. The climax of the battle occurred when chaos unleashed its final attack. It began to grow uncontrollably, its shadows expanding to engulf all of Olympus. "If you dare defy me, then you shall all vanish with me." Zeus, now filled with the combined power of all the gods, raised his golden lightning bolt. His eyes shone like stars, and his voice, charged with determination, cut through the air. "You may have existed since the beginning, but we are the order that will endure until the end." With all his strength, he hurled the lightning bolt, not directly at chaos, but into the sky above, splitting it into 1,000 rays that descended like a divine storm. Each bolt carried the power of a god, and together, they struck chaos, which screamed in agony before dissolving into an explosion of light. When silence finally fell, the throne hall was in ruins, but Olympus still stood. Chaos had been defeated, not because Zeus was invincible, but because, for the first time, he had accepted that true strength came from unity. He collapsed to his knees, exhausted, as Hera and the others approached. Zeus looked around, seeing the faces of his companions, not just subordinates, but allies. For the first time, he understood what it meant to rule, not as a solitary tyrant, but as part of something greater. The silence that followed the battle was almost deafening. The once imposing throne hall was now a ruin, its marble columns shattered, the floor cracked and littered with debris, and the walls blackened by chaos's destructive energy. Despite the devastation around them, the gods stood, looking at each other with expressions of exhaustion, but also relief. At the center of the hall, Zeus remained kneeling, his golden lightning bolt still faintly glowing in his hand. His breath was heavy, but he did not look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the ground, processing everything that had just happened. Hera was the first to step forward. Though her relationship with Zeus had always been marked by resentment and disputes, there was something different at that moment. She no longer saw the arrogant and unshakable king who ruled Olympus, but a leader who had finally bowed before his mistakes and learned the importance of sharing the burden of power. "You did what was necessary," she said, her voice softer than anyone had ever expected to hear from her. Zeus lifted his head, locking eyes with her for what felt like an eternity. "Finally," he responded, with a rare honesty, "I did, but not alone. For the first time, I truly needed all of you. And that is what saved us." The other gods began to gather. Poseidon, always wary of Zeus and often complaining about his thirst for power, now looked at his brother with respect. "Perhaps you are finally beginning to understand what it means to be a true leader," Poseidon said, extending a hand to help him up. Zeus accepted the gesture, something he had never done before, and felt the weight of his personal defeat mixed with the relief of a collective triumph. Even Hades, who usually kept himself distant from Olympus's affairs, crossed his arms and gave a slight, ironic smile. "Well, maybe you're not so unbearable after all, brother. Just maybe." As the gods spoke and helped one another recover, Zeus approached Hera once more. He did not know what to say. For so long, he had ignored her wisdom and disregarded her support. But now, he understood. She had been the backbone of his leadership. "I underestimated you, Hera. I underestimated all of you," he admitted, lowering his head in humility. Hera, in turn, lifted her chin, a subtle smile forming on her lips. "If you truly learned something today, Zeus, then perhaps there is still hope for you." Outside, in the mortal world, the storm had vanished. The sky, once dark and heavy with clouds, was now clear, with the sun rising on the horizon, painting the mountains and valleys in golden hues. Peace had been restored, but the mortals remained on their knees, praying and offering sacrifices, unaware of what had transpired on Olympus. Zeus stepped onto the balcony of what remained of the palace, gazing down at the world below. For the first time, he did not feel superior to those who lived on the earth, but responsible for them in a way he never had before. He knew that, from now on, he would have to rule not with arrogance but with shared wisdom. The sunlight illuminated his face as he spoke, almost to himself. No god, no matter how powerful, should carry the burden alone. Together, we are stronger. At the top of Mount Olympus, Zeus gazed at the horizon. The land was calm once more, but he knew that his greatest battle had never been against external forces. It had always been against the pride that had blinded him for so long. As the sun rose, Zeus spoke a phrase that would echo for eternity. "Even the most powerful among us needs others to be strong." And so, the god of gods learned the hardest lesson of all.